The email hit my inbox at 8:12 on a Monday morning. Subject line, Role Realignment Discussion, 8:30 a.m. I was still standing at the break room counter with a paper cup of burnt coffee in my hand when it came through. The kind from the third-floor machine that always tasted faintly like cardboard and regret. By 8:34, I was sitting in conference room B with my notebook closed in front of me, listening to my boss explain that after 14 years managing the company's top client accounts, I was being moved into an administrative support function to better align with the new leadership structure. Administrative support function. That was the phrase he used. Then he slid a printed org chart across the table and pointed to the box above mine. Head of Client Relations, Evan Talbot. Evan was 29 years old, had been at the company for 7 months, and was my boss's nephew. My name is Marisol Vega. I'm 46 years old, and for 14 years I was Senior Strategic Account Manager at Northgate Advisory Partners, a commercial risk consulting firm based in Dallas, Texas. We handled corporate insurance advisory, contract risk analysis, and claims strategy for mid-market manufacturers, distribution companies, and healthcare groups across Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. If you want the short version, I managed the relationships nobody else could afford to lose. At the time they demoted me, I personally handled Northgate's top 20 client accounts. Annual revenue attached to those accounts was $22.4 million. Not projected. Not pipeline. Actual contracted revenue. Over 14 years, I had increased client retention in my portfolio from 81% to 97%. I rebuilt our renewal cadence after a bad year in 2016 and cut late-stage churn by 43%. I created a response protocol called the Northgate Continuity Grid, which was just a clean way of saying I built a system so clients got answers before they had time to get nervous. That protocol reduced escalation complaints by 58% in the first year. I also wrote the executive briefing templates our partners used before every major renewal meeting, which meant half the men with titles above mine had been walking into client boardrooms sounding prepared because I had prepared them. I took calls from hospital parking lots. I once handled a contract rescue from my mother's kitchen on Thanksgiving because a manufacturing client in Fort Worth had a coverage dispute and needed revised language before Monday morning, or they were prepared to move the account. I missed my anniversary dinner in 2019 because one of our healthcare groups had a claims issue that turned into a CFO panic spiral at 7:40 p.m. My husband ate without me. He was gracious about it. I noticed anyway. Northgate ran on relationships, and relationships are built on a very simple formula that most executives somehow find mysterious. Call people back. Remember what they care about. Fix things before they become stories they tell about you. I did that for 14 years. The company itself looked respectable from the outside. Glass building in uptown Dallas. Blue-gray branding. Art in the lobby that had clearly been chosen by committee. Conference rooms named after Texas rivers, as if naming a room Brazos made the people inside it more grounded. My office was on the 3rd floor near the client operations pod. 10 desks, low partitions, constant phone traffic, and the steady sound of people trying to sound calm for money. I built 2 systems there that mattered. The continuity grid was the first. It tracked renewal risk, response deadlines, unresolved claims, executive touchpoints, and what I called temperature shifts, which was my term for the subtle change in a client's tone right before they started shopping. The second was the Vega file, though nobody called it that except Denise. Officially, it was the strategic account memory log. Unofficially, it was the reason our top clients felt like someone at Northgate actually knew them. It wasn't complicated. It was disciplined. If a client mentioned their daughter was applying to Notre Dame, I remembered. If a CFO hated being called after 4:30 because he coached high school baseball, I knew that too. If a COO said, "Don't send me a deck, just tell me the number," that went into the file. People think client loyalty is about charisma. It isn't. It's about memory and timing. Denise Harper understood that. Denise was our renewals coordinator, 52 years old, blunt in the useful way, and smart enough to know exactly which executives were decorative. She'd been at Northgate for 12 years and had the kind of practical voice that made bad news sound survivable. When the org chart landed in front of me, Denise was not in the room. Neither was Kevin Sloan, our senior analyst, who was 28, permanently sleep-deprived, and one of the few people in the building who knew how much of our client workflow actually depended on me. In the room with me were Paul Talbot, managing partner, and my boss, a woman from HR named Melissa who had never once spoken to me without a script in her hand, and Evan. Evan had on a navy suit that had cost too much and fit badly through the shoulders. The sleeves were a little short. His watch was expensive. His expression was worse. Paul folded his hands on the table and gave me the look executives use when they want to seem thoughtful while saying something indefensible. Marisol, this isn't a reflection of your contribution. That's always a promising start. We're evolving the client function, he said. We need a more modern, scalable leadership voice in front of key relationships. I looked at the org chart again, then at Evan. He smiled at me like we were discussing a seating chart problem at a wedding. Evan had joined Northgate the previous fall after what Paul described at the time as a strong run in business development. That strong run turned out to be 19 months at a software reseller in Phoenix and a short period helping his father's friend market commercial real estate listings, none of which prepared him to handle risk consulting clients with multi-state claims exposure and seven-figure renewals. But he had confidence. The kind men are often given instead of competence. The first time I met him, he came into a client prep meeting 15 minutes late, looked at the deck Kevin had built, and said, "We should probably lean harder into synergy narratives." Kevin blinked at him. "For a workers' comp renewal?" Evan nodded like he'd said something precise. "Exactly. We need to reposition the value architecture." Denise, who was taking notes, looked up at me over the rim of her glasses and said nothing. It was one of the more eloquent silences I've experienced in corporate America. Over the next 7 months, Evan treated client relations the way tourists treat expensive cities. He liked the lobby. He liked the dinners. He liked the visible part. At his second client luncheon, he mispronounced the name of one of our largest accounts twice in 3 minutes. It was Larkin Industrial. He called them Larkin. Their CEO, a man I had worked with for 11 years, corrected him once. Evan did it again 10 minutes later. Afterward, Denise came into my office, shut the door, and said, "Is he being serious?" Unfortunately, at a January renewal review, he interrupted me while I was walking Paul through a risk retention concern at Beacon Surgical Group. "I think we need to stop over-indexing on historical friction," he said. I turned to him. "The friction is an unresolved claims backlog." He smiled. "Right, but from a client perception lens." Kevin, sitting against the wall with his laptop, looked down so quickly I knew he was hiding a reaction. Then there was the taking credit. That started in February. Paul began bringing Evan into executive reviews, and suddenly the continuity grid I'd built 3 years earlier became the Talbot client visibility model in leadership decks. Not Paul Talbot. Evan Talbot. He presented it in the Brazos room one Wednesday morning with 3 slides he clearly hadn't written. "This framework," he said, clicking to a color-coded dashboard I'd personally updated at 6:10 that morning, "gives us a 360-degree retention prism." A prism. Not a dashboard. Not a workflow. A retention prism. After the meeting, Kevin came to my office and leaned against the door frame. "Did he just rename your system like it was a yacht?" "Apparently." Kevin shook his head. "I don't think he knows what any of those colors mean." "He doesn't." "You gonna say something?" "To whom?" That ended that part of the conversation. By March, Evan was inserting himself into calls he had no business leading. He'd jump in halfway through a renewal discussion and start promising more white-glove strategic touchpoints without knowing what service tiers we had already scoped. Twice he offered reporting changes we couldn't operationally support. Once he told a client we could shorten a claims review cycle by 2 weeks without asking claims. That client called me 20 minutes later. "Marisol," said Greg Hanley from Hanley Distribution, "quick question. Did your new guy just commit your team to something nobody mentioned before?" "Which part?" "The part where he said we'd have weekly executive claims summaries." I wrote that down. "No, he did not." Greg was quiet for a beat. "Thought so." "I fixed it." "Of course I fixed it. I always fixed it." That was the maddening part. Every time Evan made an error, I cleaned it up before it became visible enough to hurt him. Not to protect him. To protect the client. Which meant his incompetence had the ideal corporate environment to flourish in, invisible labor beneath a confident man. Denise saw it. Kevin saw it. Our receptionist, Tasha, probably saw it, and she only interacted with him at the front desk. Then in April, Paul made it official. Evan was promoted to head of client relations. He announced it in the Trinity conference room with catered sandwiches and a slide deck titled The Future of Northgate Client Experience. Evan stood at the front in that same expensive, poorly tailored optimism and thanked Paul for recognizing the need to refresh legacy relationship models. Legacy relationship models. That was me, apparently. 14 years of revenue, renewals, and client retention reduced to a phrase that sounded like a software cleanup project. After the meeting, Denise walked with me back to my office. He can't even run a renewal calendar, she said. I know. He asked me yesterday if claims attrition and client churn were the same thing. I opened my office door. They're not. I am aware. 2 weeks later, he asked Kevin to clean up the noise in one of the continuity grid reports by removing the red risk flags before Paul saw it. Kevin came straight to me. He wants me to take out the churn alerts. Did he say why? He said the dashboard should feel more confidence forward. I looked at Kevin for a moment. Did you do it? No. Good. That same week, I noticed Evan had started requesting copies of my client memory logs. Not directly. Through assistants. Through leadership visibility requests. Through Melissa from HR, who suddenly wanted to understand where critical account information was housed for continuity purposes. Continuity purposes is one of those phrases that should make you sit up straighter. I gave them clean summaries. Contract dates. Service structures. Escalation protocols. I did not give them the full memory logs. Because what they didn't understand, what Paul certainly didn't understand and Evan was too inexperienced to imagine, was that those top 20 relationships were not stored in a folder. They lived in me. The official CRM had names, contract values, renewal dates, and call notes written bland enough to survive discovery. My files had the actual map. Who needed directness? Who needed reassurance? Which client wanted numbers first and explanation second? Which one hated being copied on internal confusion? Which CFO would forgive a mistake if you called quickly, and which one would quietly start looking at competitors if you waited even 6 hours? That knowledge was the asset, not the spreadsheet. I started preparing on April 18th, specific date. I remember because it was the day after Evan asked Tasha to book him into 3 client lunches using my existing contacts and then referred to one of them as the oil guy, which was a creative description for the CFO of a regional medical supply group worth $1.6 million annually. On April 18th, I exported my personal contributions to the client memory logs, stripped out anything proprietary, and organized my own professional relationship history by account, contact, and timeline. I reviewed my employment agreement. Then I had an attorney look at the non-solicitation language. The restriction was 12 months and narrow. I could not directly solicit current clients while employed, and for 12 months after departure I could not initiate contact for active business with clients I had serviced in the last year. But clients could contact me, and I could work in the same industry. That distinction mattered. So did another one. Most of Northgate's top clients did not stay because of brand loyalty. They stayed because when things got tense, they asked for me by name. I also knew that our top 20 accounts had renewal clusters. 8 came up in Q3, 5 more in early Q4. If client confidence wobbled in June or July, the revenue exposure would be immediate. I didn't sabotage anything. I didn't poison relationships. I didn't whisper in anyone's ear. I simply stopped covering for Evan in ways he never noticed because he had mistaken my competence for background noise. Then came that Monday morning. Conference room B, 3rd floor. Over-air-conditioned to the point the metal leg of the chair felt cold through my skirt. Melissa with her folder. Paul with his leadership voice. Evan trying to look solemn and important at the same time, which is harder than men like him seem to think. Paul pushed the org chart toward me again. We'd like you to support Evan operationally while he assumes the strategic side of the role. I looked at the lower box. Administrative Liaison, Client Relations. That was my new title. Support Evan operationally, which, translated into plain English, meant do the work, keep quiet, and let the nephew have the title. Melissa slid a second document toward me. Revised compensation. My salary cut wasn't enormous, which I suspect they thought made it generous. 8% less base. Bonus eligibility removed. Reporting line changed from Paul to Evan. That last part was almost funny. Paul leaned forward. Marisol, we value you. This is about fit. Energy. Forward-facing leadership. Evan finally spoke. I think this frees you up to focus on execution, he said. You've always been very strong in the details. There are moments when someone tells you exactly what they think of you without realizing they've done it. I looked at him. He held the eye contact for about 2 seconds too long, the way insecure men do when they're borrowing authority from a relative. Who told Larkin we could restructure their renewal review without claims input? I asked. He blinked. I'm sorry. Last Thursday. 2:10 p.m. call. You said we'd streamline the claims oversight layer. Paul shifted in his seat. Evan said that was a strategic positioning conversation. Was it? Melissa looked at her folder very carefully. Paul cleared his throat. Let's keep this constructive. It is constructive, I said. Then I looked at the title change one more time. Understood. That was all. No speech. No scene. No helpful lesson for the room. I signed nothing in that meeting. I took copies. Stood up. Smoothed my jacket. Denise was outside near the hallway printer when I walked out, and she knew immediately from my face that the thing we'd both seen coming had arrived. They did it, she said quietly. Yes. Her jaw tightened. To admin. Administrative Liaison. She gave a short laugh with no humor in it. That is somehow worse. Kevin was at his desk when I came back through the pod. He looked up, saw the papers in my hand, and then looked back at his screen because he was young enough to still think eye contact might get someone in trouble. I set the documents down on my desk and began making a list. Not emotional tasks. Structural ones. Attorney. Resume update. Domain name check. Professional liability coverage options. CRM contact boundaries. Client transition risk by account. Cash runway. At 11:40, Evan appeared at my desk and leaned one elbow on the partition like we were already settled into the new arrangement. I know this might feel like an adjustment, he said, but I really think this setup lets us leverage your institutional horsepower more efficiently. Institutional horsepower. I looked up at him. Do you need something? He smiled, thin and pleased with himself. Actually, yes. I'll need your full client notes by end of week. All top 20. I want consistency in voice. There it was. Not the title. Not the salary cut. The assumption that the thing I had built could be handed over in a folder and worn by somebody else, like a borrowed blazer. You'll have the CRM, I said. He straightened. I need the deeper context. The CRM is the official record. He stared at me for a second, recalculating. Marisol, let's not make this territorial. I'm not. He walked away dissatisfied, which was correct. That evening I went home, opened my laptop at the dining room table, and registered Vega Hartwell Advisory. Hartwell was my mother's maiden name. The domain was available. Small mercies. By Wednesday, the first consequence arrived. Not because I caused it. Because I wasn't there to quietly absorb it anymore. Evan led a renewal call with Beacon Surgical Group, one of my oldest accounts, worth $2.4 million annually. He went in without the full memory log, without my prep notes, and apparently with the belief that confidence could substitute for history. It cannot. Halfway through the call, he offered them a revised communication structure that routed monthly claims summaries through a junior associate they had already told me twice they did not trust. Then he referred to their January credentialing issue as that admin hiccup from Q1. It had not been an admin hiccup. It had been a 4-day claims freeze that nearly triggered a board review. Denise called me from the parking garage 10 minutes after the meeting ended. He stepped on a landmine, she said. Which one? Beacon. All of Beacon. Their CFO hung up early. I wrote it down. What happened exactly? He called the freeze an admin hiccup. I closed my eyes for 1 second. Of course he did. Denise exhaled sharply. Paul's in with him now. Door shut. That same afternoon, my phone lit up with an unknown number I recognized anyway. Evan. I let it ring through. He left a voicemail. Marisol, hey, quick thing. I need some connective tissue on Beacon Surgical. There seems to be some legacy sensitivity in the account history, and I want to make sure we're telling a unified story. Call me back as soon as you can. Connective tissue. Legacy sensitivity. Unified story. He sounded like a man trying to put out a kitchen fire by adjusting the overhead lighting. I did not call him back. On Thursday, the second problem hit, and this one was bigger because it involved movement, not just offense. Greg Hanley from Hanley Distribution emailed Northgate's general client inbox asking for a meeting to discuss account representation going forward. That is corporate language for we are considering leaving. Hanley was a $1.9 million account. Greg had worked with me for 9 years. He was direct, impatient, and deeply allergic to unnecessary optimism. Kevin texted me from his personal phone at 6:18 that evening. Everything's falling apart since you left. I called him. He answered in a whisper. I'm still in the office. Then whisper faster. He gave a strained half-laugh. Beacon wants a senior-level corrective meeting. Hanley asked whether you're still with the firm. Evan told them yes, sort of, and now Paul's furious because Greg apparently said, and I'm quoting, if Marisol's not running this account, I need to rethink why we're paying you people. I leaned back in my chair. Kevin kept going. And Larkin moved their Thursday review to next week because they want clarity on relationship leadership, which is not a phrase people use when they're happy. How many know about the title change? Enough. That was the problem with client trust. It moves quietly until it doesn't, and then everyone can hear it at once. Kevin. Yeah, keep your work clean. Don't alter anything. If someone asks you to change a client record, make sure it's documented. There was a pause. You were ready for this, he said. Yes. Another pause. Then, softer, are you okay? I looked at the legal pad in front of me. Vega Hartwell Advisory written across the top. 3 possible office spaces listed underneath. A draft service menu in the margin. Yes, I said. I think I am. Friday morning, Paul called. Not emailed. Called. I answered on the 4th ring. Marisol. His voice was careful. Too careful. Paul. I'd like you to come in this afternoon. We need to talk through some transition issues. No. Silence. Then, Marisol, a few accounts are expressing confusion. I imagine they are. We need your help stabilizing the message. There it was again. The message. As if this were a branding problem and not the entirely predictable result of putting a nephew in charge of relationships he had not earned. I'm unavailable. His tone tightened. This isn't the time to be difficult. I looked out my kitchen window at the street below. Quiet. Sunny. The kind of ordinary Texas morning that makes corporate panic sound especially thin. I'm not being difficult, Paul. I'm being accurate. He said nothing. Then I heard another voice in the background. Evan. Too muffled to catch the words, but agitated enough that I could hear the shape of them. Paul lowered his voice. At least send over your personal notes on Beacon, Hanley, and Larkin. No. Marisol. The CRM is the official record. I hung up. At 2:17 that afternoon, Denise sent me a single text. Larkin asked if you'd started your own firm yet. I read it twice. Then my phone rang again. Unknown number. Dallas area code. I answered. Marisol, said a voice I knew immediately. Greg Hanley. Greg. He didn't bother with pleasantries. He never had. Are you still at Northgate? Not in the way you're asking. That's what I thought. Papers rustled on his end. I'm going to ask you something, and if you can't answer, just say that. You starting something? I looked at the legal pad on the table. The registered domain. The attorney's email from that morning about entity formation. The draft client transition memo sitting unsent in my laptop. Possibly, I said. He was quiet for half a second. Okay, he said. Because if Larkin's asking the same question I am, your old company is about to have a very bad summer. Then he added, almost casually, and Beacon's CFO wants your number. That was when I understood the first wave wasn't the story. It was the warning. By the end of the second week, it wasn't just my accounts wobbling. It was the building. Northgate had always liked to pretend client relations was a polished front-end function. Nice suits, clean decks, confident handshakes in expensive restaurants. What they never seemed to grasp was that once the clients started losing confidence, every other department got dragged into it behind them. Claims, legal, analytics, finance, even operations, which only mattered to leadership when something was visibly on fire. Something was visibly on fire. Beacon Surgical didn't just want a corrective meeting. They wanted an executive review of all open claims communication for the prior 6 months, which meant Kevin's team had to pull records, Denise had to reconstruct meeting notes, and claims had to spend 48 hours proving that the delays Evan had casually described as admin hiccups had in fact been escalated properly. 3 departments, 1 stupid sentence. Then Hanley Distribution froze a pending renewal addendum worth $420,000 until they had clarity on account leadership and service continuity. Clarity on account leadership. Corporate language is very elegant when people are trying not to say you've put an amateur in charge of something valuable. Larkin Industrial was next. They had a Q3 renewal package scheduled for review, worth $3.1 million annually, and instead of confirming the agenda, they requested a full relationship audit. Not a policy audit. A relationship audit. They wanted a list of who would be handling their account, who had decision authority, and who exactly had approved the change in contact structure. That request landed with enough force that finance got pulled in because revenue forecasting had to be revised if Larkin hesitated. So now finance was angry too. Kevin called me that Friday night from his car. "I think Paul's actually sweating," he said. "That's encouraging." "I'm serious." They had legal in Brazos for 2 hours this afternoon. Claims was there too. Denise came out looking like she wanted to hit somebody with a stapler. Understandable. And Evan did a client presentation at noon that I don't think he's surviving. That got my attention. What happened? Kevin exhaled. Paul made him lead the Larkin review because he wanted to show leadership continuity. Evan put up a slide titled Client Confidence Reset. I waited. He used one of your old decks and changed the header colors. Then he told Larkin their concerns were mostly emotional and said Northgate was moving away from single-threaded relationship dependency. I said nothing for a second. Kevin filled the silence. Frank Danner asked him if that meant you were the dependency. Frank Danner was Larkin's COO. 10 years in my portfolio. Dry, surgical, impossible to charm. The sort of man who did not waste contempt. What did Evan say? He said, and I quote, Marisol was excellent tactically, but we're building something more scalable now. I leaned back in my chair. Kevin kept going. Frank stared at him for maybe 5 seconds and then said, "That's a long way to say you pushed out the only person here who knew our business." Then he ended the meeting. There it was. Public. Clean. Fatal. Not a private complaint. Not a quiet concern. A client saying it out loud, in front of Paul, legal, finance, and whoever else had been crammed into that room to witness the nephew perform surgery with garden tools. What happened after? I asked. Kevin laughed once, with no joy in it. No idea. I wasn't in the room. But Evan came out 20 minutes later looking like he needed to sit down, and Paul walked straight past everyone without speaking. The relational damage became financial by Monday. Larkin sent notice that they were suspending renewal discussions pending leadership review. Hanley formally requested release language in the event they chose to move the account at expiration. Beacon demanded an in-person remediation meeting with a managing partner present. That's 3 major accounts destabilized in less than 10 business days. Combined annual revenue exposure, $7.4 million. And once those numbers hit the forecasting model, the panic spread upward. Finance started revising projections. Operations started getting asked for service assurance summaries. Claims managers were suddenly included on calls they should have been included on from the beginning. The partners, men who had treated client retention like weather for years, discovered that weather becomes very interesting when it starts blowing revenue off the roof. Then came the regulatory problem. Not government regulatory. Contractual. Northgate had service-level commitments written into several of its larger accounts. Response windows. Escalation benchmarks. Named senior contacts. Those terms are not decorative. They exist because when clients pay 7 figures a year, they prefer not to be surprised by organizational stupidity. In replacing me with Evan, Northgate had quietly violated named contact language in 2 agreements without issuing formal amendment notices. One of those contracts was Beacon's. The other was a regional manufacturing group worth $1.4 million that had not yet exploded only because they hadn't noticed. Beacon had. Denise texted me 3 words on Tuesday morning. They found the clause. Then she sent a photo of her legal pad. Not company documents. Just her own handwritten note from a meeting. At the bottom, underlined twice, were the words potential breach notice. I called her. She answered immediately. I shouldn't be talking. Then talk fast. Beacon's counsel says the contract names you as senior account authority for claims escalation. They never amended it. Evan's been speaking as account head without formal notice. I closed my eyes for exactly 1 second. Who knows? Paul. Legal. Finance. Probably the whole partner group by lunch. And Evan. A short, humorless laugh. Evan asked if contract naming conventions were more aspirational than binding. Of course he did. There is a very specific type of corporate man who hears the word contract and assumes it is the opening bid in a conversation. Evan had apparently decided written obligations were more of a mood board. What did legal say? Nothing in front of me. But Paul told him to stop talking. That afternoon Paul called again. I answered because by then I wanted to hear the shape of the desperation. Marisol. Paul. We need to meet. No. His voice was thinner now. Less managing partner. More man who had explained the same bad numbers 3 times already. This has become bigger than a personnel decision. It always was. A pause. We can discuss compensation. I said nothing. Consulting. Interim transition support. Executive advisory. Name the structure. There are moments when people tell you exactly what they think money can erase. This was one of them. I appreciate the offer, I said, but you don't need a consultant. You need a witness. Silence. Then, quietly, what does that mean? It means you don't have a messaging problem, Paul. You have a credibility problem. And I can't rent you mine by the hour. I hung up. Denise called me 12 minutes later and said, "What did you say to him?" The truth. She let out a breath that sounded suspiciously like satisfaction. Good. By Thursday, the board was involved. Northgate had an advisory board that usually existed in the ceremonial way boards at firms like that often do. Quarterly lunches. Strategic decks. Concerned expressions over expensive pastries. But when $7.4 million in annual revenue gets shaky and legal starts using the phrase breach exposure, ceremonial oversight becomes remarkably hands-on. Kevin texted me from the stairwell. Board members on site. Evan just got pulled into Trinity with Paul and legal. Then, 5 minutes later, Denise says finance is modeling worst-case attrition. Then, 11 of 20 asked about you. I stared at that last message for a while. 11 of 20. That was not speculation anymore. That was movement. Clients had started asking directly whether I was available, whether I had left the industry, whether I was building something. None of them were doing anything improper. They were asking about a person they trusted after the company had made itself untrustworthy. Perfectly legal. Perfectly logical. Completely terrifying if you happen to be Northgate. That evening my business attorney sent the final formation documents for Vega Hartwell Advisory. LLC active. E&O coverage bound. Banking in process. I signed everything electronically at 6:42 p.m. At 7:10, my phone rang. Paul again. This time, when I answered, he wasn't alone. I could hear voices in the background. A room tone. Low, urgent movement. Someone talking over someone else. Marisol, he said, too quickly. I need 10 minutes with you tonight. That's all. No. Please. That word from him was new. I said, who's there? A pause. Then, Paul, put her on speaker, came Evan's voice in the background. Paul must have done it because the room sound shifted. Then Evan, stripped now of the performance voice he'd been using for 7 months, said, "Marisol, I need you to stop doing this." I almost admired the sentence for its efficiency. Doing what? You know exactly what. Clients are spooked. People are overreacting. This whole thing has become your responsibility? He made a sharp sound, somewhere between a breath and a laugh. This isn't just about me. No, it never was. Then he said the thing men like him always say when the insulation disappears. You're being petty. I looked at the wall in my home office. Quiet room. Soft lamp. My own company name in a folder on the desk. Petty would have been undermining you. I did the opposite for 7 months. Nothing on the other end for a second. Then he snapped, composure finally gone. Fine. Then tell me what you want. Because this is insane. Larkin is threatening to walk, Hanley's asking for transfer language, Beacon won't take my calls, and Paul says half the board thinks I'm a liability, so what do you want? There it was. Not strategy. Not leadership. Not synergy narratives. Panic. I kept my voice even. A different conversation. Then I hung up. The next morning, Greg Hanley called before 9 o'clock. I'll keep this simple, he said. If you open your doors, send me the paperwork. For what exactly? Representation review. Maybe transition. Depends how fast you move. And Larkin. A short pause. Frank asked me if I had your number. Draw your own conclusions. I did. By the end of that week, Northgate wasn't trying to stabilize accounts anymore. They were trying to stop a client migration. And that is a very different kind of fear. Because once clients start deciding their loyalty belongs to a person instead of a logo, the logo has about 60 days to become humble. Sometimes less. The call that changed everything came the following Monday at 8:03 a.m. Not from Paul. From Evan. I almost didn't answer. Then I did. His voice was wrong immediately. Too fast. Too flat. Like someone trying to sound composed while standing in ankle-deep water. Marisol, we're losing Beacon. I said nothing. He kept going. They've requested release options. Hanley's counsel asked for account transition language. Larkin has suspended all strategic review meetings. Paul wants to meet. Today. In person. In what capacity? A pause. Then, very quietly, in whatever capacity gets you back in the building. That was the first honest thing he'd said to me in months. We met that afternoon in Trinity. Same conference room where he had stood under a slide deck and thanked Paul for refreshing legacy relationship models. Same long table. Same glass wall. Different atmosphere entirely. The room felt colder than it needed to. Or maybe everyone in it did. Paul was there. Melissa from HR again, because institutions like to keep witnesses when they're about to reverse themselves. Denise was not in the room, but I knew she was somewhere nearby. Kevin too. You can tell when a floor is listening. Evan was seated halfway down the table. No jacket, tie loosened, legal pad in front of him with nothing written on it. That detail stayed with me. A blank page in front of a man who had spent 7 months speaking in bullet points he didn't understand. Paul didn't waste time. We want you back. I sat down. Folded my hands. Waited. He continued. Chief Client Officer. Reporting directly to me. Full authority over strategic accounts, renewals, escalation protocols, and client continuity planning. Evan looked at the table. Melissa slid a draft term sheet across to me. Base salary of $340,000, Paul said. Signing bonus of $90,000. Equity participation over a 3-year vesting period. That was just under 3 times my previous base. Better than I expected. Still not enough by itself. And? I said. Paul blinked. And what? I looked at him. If you want me to repair 11 destabilized relationships and rebuild a function you dismantled on purpose, that term sheet is the beginning of the conversation. Not the whole thing. He nodded once. What do you need? This is where people expect a dramatic pause. A little theater. Some emotional flourish. I had a legal pad. I opened it. Chief Client Officer, permanent, not transitional. Contractual authority over the top 20 accounts, renewal strategy, service escalations, and client staffing. No executive overrides without written documentation. Paul nodded slowly. Compensation as stated, plus an additional retention pool tied to recovered revenue. Minimum $120,000 if the top 10 accounts are stabilized within 12 months. Melissa wrote that down. Denise Harper moves to Director of Renewal Operations with a 20% salary increase and written acknowledgement that her documentation during this period preserved account integrity. Paul glanced at Melissa. She kept writing. Kevin Sloan becomes Senior Client Analytics Lead with a 15% increase and direct access to account review meetings. No more burying analysis 3 levels down because someone in a jacket wants cleaner slides. From somewhere behind Evan's face, I thought I saw the faintest flicker of understanding. And I said, every member of the client operations team who is pressured to alter records, soften risk flags, or conceal churn indicators receives a written apology from management and protection from retaliation. Paul leaned back slightly. That's broader than I expected. Yes. I turned the page. Finally, I want a formal internal report. Timeline of decisions. Title changes. Client impacts. Revenue exposure. Who authorized what and when. Preserved in partner records. Evan looked up so fast he might as well have been pulled by wire. No. I looked at him. He swallowed. That's not necessary. It is. It creates liability. Yes. Paul said quietly, Marisol. I closed the pad. No report, no return. Evan pushed back from the table, both hands flat now, composure gone in pieces. This is unbelievable, he said. You want to come back and humiliate everyone on paper? No, I said. I want accuracy. He laughed once, sharp and ugly. Accuracy? You left and now clients are acting like the company can't function without you. I met his eyes. Can it? That landed. Hard. Nothing theatrical happened after that. No one stormed out. No one banged a fist on the table. Real power shifts are usually quieter than television would like them to be. Paul looked at Evan for a long moment, then at Melissa, then back at me. If we agree to all of it, he said, how quickly can you start? Once it's signed. Not discussed. Signed. He nodded. Melissa gathered the papers. Evan said, Paul, you can't be serious. Paul turned to him with a level of fatigue that had finally replaced loyalty. I am serious. That shut him up. The documents took 3 days. My attorney reviewed every line. So did I. Permanent role. Full authority. Compensation confirmed. Equity confirmed. Denise and Kevin's promotions in writing. Anti-retaliation language. Formal apology letters. Internal report requirement, specific enough that nobody could turn it into a vague summary full of passive verbs. I signed Friday at 4:11 p.m. The same time of day, roughly, that so many bad corporate decisions seemed to get made. Mine just happened to be a good one. I walked back into Northgate the following Monday at 8:05. The third-floor machine still made burnt coffee. Some systems are apparently eternal. Tasha at the front desk saw me first. Her face changed instantly. Relief. Then professionalism, because she was good at her job. Good morning, Ms. Vega. Good morning, Tasha. The new office is ready. New office. Window. Corner of the 4th floor, where partners had to walk past me to reach the boardroom. Thoughtful placement. Possibly deliberate. I appreciated the symbolism without needing it. When the elevator opened on 3, Denise was standing by the client pod holding 2 folders and a coffee. She handed me the coffee first. You look expensive, she said. I am. That got the smile I expected. Kevin was right behind her, laptop already open, eyes brighter than I'd seen them in months. We rebuilt the churn model, he said. I kept the original flags. I also kept the emails where Evan asked me to remove them. Of course he did. He grinned. I learned from the best. I stood there for a second, coffee in hand, looking at the 2 people who had held the floor together while the company experimented with nepotism like it was a business strategy. Thank you, I said. Denise shrugged lightly. We were waiting. Then I walked through the pod. People looked up. Not dramatically. Just enough. Heads turning. Shoulders dropping. That particular office-wide exhale that happens when competence re-enters the room and everyone knows it before anyone says it. My new office had glass on two sides and a whiteboard already mounted on the far wall. Someone had placed a printed packet on the desk labeled Immediate Account Stabilization Priorities. Better than flowers. At 8:30, I called Beacon. Their CFO answered personally. Marisol. Yes. A pause. Then, are you back with authority or back as decoration? Authority. Good, he said. Then let's fix this. Hanley took my call at 9:10. Larkin at 10:40. By noon I had 3 in-person meetings scheduled and a renewal rescue plan mapped across the whiteboard in 4 colors. I did not ask permission. No one offered interference. That afternoon, walking back from the printer, I passed Evan near the elevators. He had a notebook in his hand this time. Actual notes on the page. Improvement. He stepped aside to let me pass. Marisol. Evan. He looked like he might say something else. Then thought better of it. Also improvement. 8 months later, Northgate looked like a company that had survived a self-inflicted injury and finally decided to stop confusing access with ability. My title was Chief Client Officer. The top 20 accounts were intact, and not just intact. Expanded. Annual revenue across that portfolio had climbed from $22.4 million to $24.9 million. Beacon renewed for 3 years. Hanley added a regional claims advisory package worth another $600,000 annually. Larkin, after making Northgate sweat for exactly the amount of time Frank Danner felt was educational, renewed at $3.3 million and sent a note to Paul that simply said, "Good correction." That's Frank for applause. Denise was director of renewal operations and thriving in the role she should have had years earlier. She ran quarterly retention reviews like a controlled demolition team. Clean, exact, no wasted motion. She also had a better office and a salary that finally matched how often other people needed her to save them. Kevin became senior client analytics lead and, freed from the old requirement that analysis be optimistic before it was accurate, built the best forecasting model Northgate had ever had. He now got invited to partner meetings because his numbers kept being right. A novel criterion, but welcome. I put 3 new rules in place within my first 60 days. No executive could lead or alter a top-tier client relationship without a 90-day shadow period and documented account review. No churn or risk indicator could be suppressed without written justification preserved in the CRM. And no account leadership change could occur without formal client notice and contract review. Simple policies. Expensive lessons. The total cost of Evan's promotion, the demotion, the destabilized accounts, the emergency retention concessions, legal review, and lost business opportunities came to $8.6 million over 9 months. Finance presented that number to the partners in a deck they did not enjoy. I did not attend that meeting. I already knew the number would be ugly. Evan was still there. Not as head of client relations. That title no longer existed. He'd been moved into a business development support role with a narrow lane, no authority over strategic accounts, and what Denise once described as adult supervision at all times. That was a little sharper than I would have put it. Not inaccurate, though. We were cordial when necessary. Professional always. He had learned to ask questions before making promises, which is progress, and to stop renaming other people's work in meetings, which is growth of a kind. Northgate also ended up retaining Vega Hartwell Advisory. Not as my main job. As an affiliated strategic consulting entity for select overflow accounts and continuity planning outside our core regions. Completely disclosed. Board approved. Very clean. Very satisfying. Because in the end, 11 of the 20 had asked about following me. They didn't have to. The company changed enough that staying became reasonable. That's the part people sometimes miss when they want these stories to end in ashes. I didn't want ashes. I wanted correction. I wanted the people who did the actual work to be protected, paid, and heard. I wanted the clients to stop being used as props in someone else's family arrangement. I wanted the building to function properly. It does now. My life outside the office got better too. I stopped taking calls from parking lots. I went to my anniversary dinner on time. Twice, actually, because my husband said the first on-time dinner could have been a fluke. Fair point. I also took a week off in October and did not bring my laptop. Denise texted me one photo of the third-floor coffee machine with the caption, "Still terrible, still here." That made me laugh more than it should have. Sometimes, early in the morning, I still think about that email from 8:12. Role realignment discussion, 8:30 a.m. The cardboard coffee in my hand. The cold chair in conference room B, administrative support function. What they meant was, stay useful, become smaller. What happened instead was simpler. They found out the relationship was the job. That was the whole thing. Not charisma. Not decks. Not leadership buzzwords arranged in a nice suit. Trust. Memory. Judgment. The unglamorous discipline of showing up for people consistently enough that when someone tries to replace you with a relative and a title, the clients notice before you have to say a word. If you've ever been underestimated at work, I hope this story reminds you that quiet preparation always beats loud arrogance. If this resonated, like and subscribe. I share stories like this every week. And remember, when they tell you you're only good at the details, make sure they learn which detail was holding up the whole business.